My daughter applied for a scholarship at a billionaire CEO's foundation, not knowing he was her father. Let me take you down a quiet road for a moment, to a small American town called Willow Ridge. A place where the wind speaks softly, the houses lean in close to one another, and the smallest choices echo for years. Everyone knows your smile. Everyone knows your schedule. But family, what folks think they know about you, is never the whole story. Willow Ridge held laughter, tears, dreams, disappointments, and one house on the corner of Lacey Street held a story life had pressed down for far too long. That home belonged to Elora Wynne, a woman whose heart carried quiet strength and silent storms. She wasn't loud. She wasn't demanding. She simply lived her life with dignity, raising her daughter, Seren, the best way she knew how. She was one of those young souls who looked like she'd been kissed by promise itself. Books in her backpack, dreams in her spirit, and a determination in her steps that made you feel like she was headed somewhere important, even if she didn't know where yet. I got to watch her grow into a young woman who didn't complain about hardships. She watered her own hope. She protected her own light. But let me be honest with you, there was always a shadow around her that she never talked about, a missing piece she covered with ambition, a question she buried beneath straighter report cards and volunteer hours. She didn't know her father. And the silence around that truth was louder than any words her mother could have spoken, the weight Elora carried. Now, Elora wasn't the type to sit her daughter down and spill every secret. She believed in shielding her child from pain, even if that meant carrying the weight alone. I remember nights when Seren would be doing homework at the kitchen table, and Elora would stand in the doorway just watching her. Her eyes held a heaviness only a woman who has loved and lost can understand. Sometimes she'd go to her bedroom, close the door, and sit at the edge of her bed with an old wooden box in her hands. She never opened it. She only held it. Like the memories inside might burn her if she lifted the lid, and she'd whisper things only God could hear. Now, that's the thing about small towns. You can hide the past from your neighbors, but you can't always hide it from your child. Seren always wondered. She never said it out loud, not once, but she carried that question inside her like a folded letter. All these questions lived quietly behind her smile, and you and I know that sometimes the questions we're afraid to ask become the heaviest burdens to carry. But instead of letting the unknown break her, Seren used it as fuel. She poured herself into her education. She volunteered at the community center. She helped the kids in town with tutoring. She took every scholarship pamphlet she could find and studied them like they were treasure maps. Because deep down, she wanted her own story to turn into something more, something bigger than this town, bigger than her circumstances. She didn't just want to leave Willow Ridge. She wanted to rise. The spark of a new possibility. I'll never forget the evening she discovered the one opportunity that made her heart beat faster. The Wardstone Foundation Scholarship. When she read about it, her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen before. Living stipend, mentorship, a chance to start fresh, away from the whispers of Willow Ridge. This could change everything, she said, her voice trembling with hope. But hope isn't always light. Sometimes hope is heavy, because the things we want most carry the most risk. Still, she applied. Every word in that application felt like a prayer she didn't know how to say out loud. And Elora? When she saw her daughter's excitement, her hands trembled. She tried to smile, but her spirit shook because something deep inside her whispered, "If she gets this, The past might come back, but she didn't say a word. She simply hugged her daughter tighter than usual, the way a mother holds on when she feels change coming. You ever felt a change in the air before anything even happens? Serene waited by the mailbox. She checked her email 10 times a day, her knees nearly buckled. It was a doorway leading straight into Elora's past. And let me tell you something I've learned in this life. The past will always meet you again, but to heal what you thought would never mend. And that's exactly what was waiting on the other side of this opportunity. High above the city skyline stood the headquarters of the Wardstone Innovation Group, a tower so tall it seemed to press its fingerprints into the clouds. Lived a man whose soul carried a weight far heavier than his wealth. To the world, he was the definition of success. Sharp suits, a name spoken in the news, the kind of influence that made powerful people lean forward when he talked. But let me tell you the truth behind those glass walls. There's a big difference between being successful and being whole. He was a man the world praised. Folks often think money washes away every ache in the heart. It cannot make life meaningful. Caspian built his empire from the ground up. I'm talking sleepless nights, borrowed laptops, living off cheap noodles while coding until his eyes burned. He didn't come from wealth. He came from hunger. Hunger for more, hunger for progress, hunger to never feel powerless again. But here's the thing nobody warns you about. When you push yourself to outrun the pain behind you, sometimes you run right past the people who needed you beside them. And that's exactly what happened to him nearly 2 decades earlier. The love that changed him. Before the wealth, before the tower, before his face appeared on magazine covers. There was Elora Wynne. I tell you the truth. She was the kind of woman who didn't need diamonds to shine. Her presence alone was enough. They were young, hopeful, and in love in the kind of way that makes you feel like the whole world is opening up just for the two of you. Late nights studying together, long talks about dreams. Quiet moments where just being in the same room felt like a blessing. Caspian used to say Elora was the calm in his storm, and the voice that helped him believe in his own ideas. Life has a way of testing the very things we hold most dear. His work started picking up. Investors wanted meetings at all hours. He began traveling more than he was home. What started as ambition slowly became imbalance, and then something happened. Something neither of them planned for, but something that could have been the greatest blessing of his life. Sometimes a blessing arrives during a season we're not prepared for, and instead of embracing it, fear takes the wheel. That's what happened to Caspian. He didn't turn his back on Elora. He didn't reject the child. One day, while he was away for a crucial business trip, Elora faced complications in her pregnancy. She needed him. She reached out, or simply the wrong time. But Elora saw that silence and believed it was deliberate, believed he chose ambition over family. And the child they created, the silent tribute he created. You know what a man does when he can't rewrite his past? He tries to reshape the future for someone else. Every year after losing them, Caspian created a scholarship, dedicated to supporting students from single-parent homes. He named it the Wynne Scholarship, quietly honoring the woman he lost and the daughter he never met. But he didn't tell the press. He didn't tell his board. He didn't need recognition. This was a father's quiet prayer, a man's way of saying, wherever you are, I hope this reaches you somehow. He reviewed applications personally every year, searching for something familiar in those young faces, hoping, just once, he might see a name that made his heart jump. He never did. until the year Serin Wynn applied. Caspian's assistant placed a stack of finalist folders on his desk. He opened them one by one. Strong candidates, inspiring young people, stories that touched the heart. He opened one that made his breath catch, a last name that hit him like a memory knocking on a locked door, a birth date that matched the timeline of his greatest heartbreak, a photo that carried something unmistakable in her eyes. He stared at that file for a long time. His hand trembled slightly as he flipped each page, reading her accomplishments, her essays, her hopes. But something inside him, the part of a father that never died, told him he needed to meet her. And that's how the moment came, where a billionaire CEO sat in a quiet room staring across a table at a young woman who had no idea her entire life was about to change. Willow Ridge had a way of making dreams feel like they were too big for the town. Yet somehow, those dreams still found a way to grow. And nowhere was that more true than in the heart of young Serin Wynn. There was something special about her. Not loud, not boastful, just steady. A quiet determination that didn't need applause to keep moving. When other teenagers were chasing trends or escaping boredom, Serin was building a future she hoped would carry her somewhere meaningful. She kept a stack of scholarship brochures on her bedside table, each one highlighted, bookmarked, and carefully studied. She wanted more than a degree. She wanted a chance to create change in places where people felt forgotten. She wanted to uplift communities like her own, towns where people worked hard, carried burdens in silence, and kept going no matter what. But beneath all of that ambition, she carried a question she never voiced. A question about the part of her story left blank. The quiet void she tried to ignore. Sometimes at night, she would sit by her window, chin resting on her knees, watching porch lights flicker across the neighborhood. And she would wonder about the man whose face she never saw. And in doing so, she became a young woman whose light shone far beyond her circumstances. One evening, as she filled out yet another scholarship application, she came across a question she always dreaded. The cursor blinked on the screen like it was staring right back at her. Just like she'd done her whole life. She didn't know that miles away, the very man she was thinking about had spent years searching for that missing name, too. The scholarship that sparked something new. Then came the day she discovered the Wardstone Foundation scholarship. She read through the description slowly, almost holding her breath. Housing included, mentorship from leaders in community development, and an opportunity to study anywhere she dreamed. It didn't feel real. It felt like an open window in a room she never realized was getting too small for her hope. Her heart raced as she read it again. This was the kind of opportunity that could shift an entire future. She grabbed her notebook and began outlining her essay, pouring her story out with honesty. Her dreams, her struggles, her motivation, her desire to help others the way her mother had helped her. There was no mention of her father, just a line about growing up in a home filled with love and lessons, even when life wasn't easy. When she hit submit, she felt lighter, like she'd placed her future in motion. She didn't know that the man interviewing her had spent 17 years hoping he might somehow find her. She didn't know that the name Wardstone meant far more than an opportunity. She didn't know she was walking straight toward the truth her heart had always wondered about. And neither did she know that one meeting, one conversation, one look, would begin a story she never imagined she was part of. The day of the interview arrived with a kind of nervous quiet that settles in your chest before anything important. Serin stood in front of the mirror, that morning, wearing the one outfit she and her mother had spent hours preparing. A simple navy skirt, a soft blouse, and a cardigan pressed with care. She looked at her reflection, then whispered a tiny prayer under her breath. Not a long one, just a small request for strength. Elora watched her daughter the entire time, hands folded at her waist, trying to smile, even though her heart trembled with every breath. They drove to the city in silence, not because they didn't have anything to say, but because sometimes the weight of change fills every word before it can reach the tongue. The moment they arrived, Serin stepped out of the car and stared upward. The Wardstone Tower stretched so high, it made her feel like she was standing at the foot of her own future. The glass sparked in the sunlight, as if it were promising possibilities she never thought she'd touch. She inhaled sharply. "This is really happening," she whispered. Elora nodded, but couldn't find her voice. She hugged Serin tighter than she had the night before, then watched her daughter walk toward the entrance with hope in her stride. She felt both pride and dread inside the tower. The lobby was grand, tall ceilings, cool marble floors, soft lighting, and people in tailored suits moving with purpose. Serin tried to hide the way her heart pounded, the way her palms grew warm, the way the moment wrapped itself around her. She checked in at the front desk, received a visitor badge, and was led to the conference area where the other finalists sat. Most of them looked polished, designer clothing, expensive shoes, confident posture like they'd been trained for these kinds of moments since childhood. Serin sat down quietly, smoothing out her cardigan, reminding herself she belonged here just as much as anyone else. She didn't know that several floors above her, someone else felt the same trembling in his chest, but for reasons far more personal. The pull he couldn't ignore. Caspian Ward rarely attended the finalist interviews. He trusted his committee, trusted the process. His presence wasn't necessary. But that morning, something pressed on his spirit, a quiet urging, a sense that this year, this day, held something he couldn't ignore. He found himself unable to stay in his office, unable to focus on meetings, unable to push aside the voice that whispered to him. So he did. He walked into the conference room without announcing himself, his presence drawing attention instantly. Conversations quieted. Finalists straightened their posture. But Caspian didn't look at any of them at first. He scanned the room slowly, his eyes moving until they landed on one young woman sitting at the end of the table, nervous, hopeful, and completely unaware that he had already memorized her photo a dozen times since opening her file. Not because he was shocked, but because he felt something he didn't have words for, an unexplainable recognition, a pull deep enough to shake him, a moment that made the rest of the room fade away. She looked up briefly and offered him a polite smile. The interview begins. One by one, the finalists were called into a smaller conference room. When Serin's name was called, she stood up so quickly her chair nearly tipped back. She walked in with her notes clutched tight. Several board members sat around the table. Caspian took a seat at the far end, still silent, still observing, trying to calm the storm rising in his chest. The moment Serin began speaking, the room shifted. She didn't have polished charm. She didn't have rehearsed answers. But she had sincerity, pure, heartfelt sincerity. She talked about her mother, her town, her desire to serve communities and lift others up. Her voice trembled at times, but her truth never did. Her quiet courage. Every word she spoke was like a piece of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for 17 long years. Near the end of the interview, one of the board members asked, "What motivates you?" Serin paused. She folded her hands in her lap, then lifted her eyes. "My mother," she said softly. Caspian inhaled sharply. "She's carried so much without expecting anything in return. She never talks about my father, and I never ask because I can tell it hurts her. I don't know why he disappeared, or if he ever thought of me. But she taught me that life isn't about who left. It's about who stayed and helped you stand." Caspian blinked hard, his throat tightening. She continued, voice barely above a whisper, "Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks of me, even for a moment. But whether he does or not, I want to live a life that makes my mother proud." Caspian's heart felt like it had been struck. This young woman who looked like a quiet echo of his past, this young woman bearing his last name in the form of a wound. She was speaking words he had feared hearing his entire life. He looked down, unable to speak, afraid his expression would reveal everything. The unmistakable moment. When the interview ended, the committee thanked her. She stood, offered a polite smile, and walked out with her folder held tight against her chest. As the door closed behind her, Caspian remained seated, breath shallow, because the truth settled on him with a weight he couldn't push away. He wasn't just looking at a scholarship applicant. And for the first time in 17 years, he wasn't wondering where she might be. She was right there, just steps away, alive, bright, beautiful, and completely unaware of the truth that had just shaken the man who created her. Outside the glass doors of the Wardstone Tower, Elora Wynne stood waiting on the sidewalk, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. People rushed past her, professionals in sharp suits, delivery workers, tourists looking up at the building with awe. But she didn't see any of them. Her eyes stayed fixed on those doors. Every few seconds she paced 2 steps forward, then back again, her heart racing in ways she hadn't felt since she was a much younger woman. On the surface, she was here simply as a supportive mother waiting for her daughter's interview to end. But beneath that surface, a storm was forming. She tried steadying her breathing, but the air felt heavy inside her chest. Memories she had spent years pushing aside were returning, like waves she couldn't stop. For 17 years, she had created a quiet life in Willow Ridge. For 17 years, she avoided any trace of the man she once loved. But today, she felt something shifting. A subtle unease, a whisper of the past moving closer. She didn't know he was just floors above her. She didn't know he had seen their daughter. She didn't know the truth she'd hidden so carefully was seconds from stepping out into the open. Inside the tower, the truth was stirring. After the interview, Caspian sat alone in the conference room long after the panel dismissed themselves. His hands rested on the table, fingers trembling slightly, heart pounding against his ribs. It's her. It has to be her. The way she carried herself. A man can ignore coincidences, but he cannot ignore truth when it sits right in front of him. She looked down at her hands. I used to, when I was younger. But I stopped asking because it always made my mother sad. He swallowed hard. And what do you feel now? She took a moment before speaking, choosing her words carefully. I think there's a difference between wanting someone in your life and wanting to understand the story that created you. I don't need him to be perfect. I just Sometimes wonder if he ever cared. Those words pierced him. She didn't know they were piercing the very heart of the man who had spent 17 years wondering if she was safe, loved, and happy. He leaned forward slightly, voice gentler than before. If you had the chance to know the truth, would you want it? She hesitated. Only if it didn't hurt my mother. That was the moment something inside him broke open. Her heart, her compassion, her loyalty. They were reflections of the woman he once loved. He opened his mouth to tell her something. Not the full truth, but the beginning of it. I need to share something with you, he began softly. Something I should have said long ago. A knock at the door interrupted him. His assistant peeked in. Sir, there's someone here asking to speak with you. She says it's urgent, he frowned. She said her name is Elora Wynne. Seren's head snapped up. Caspian froze. Every memory he had buried rose to the surface at once. Elora stepped into the room slowly, eyes locked on him. Their gazes collided, two souls that had once been inseparable standing face to face again. It held its breath. Elora whispered his name with a softness that carried 17 years of unspoken pain. Caspian. His voice broke as he answered. Elora. Seren sat between them, confusion washing over her. You two know each other? Both of them turned toward her at the exact same moment. The truth wasn't knocking anymore. It was standing in the room. The air inside that office changed the moment Elora stepped through the doorway. Not a sound moved. Not a breath dared to stir. It was as if the entire room leaned in to listen. I watched as Caspian and Elora looked at one another. Two people who once shared dreams, sorrow, youth, and tenderness now standing separated by nearly 2 decades of silence. Neither knew what words to reach for first. Elora's eyes glistened, not from anger, but from the shock of seeing a man she had once loved with her whole heart. A man she believed she had left behind forever. A man she never expected to stand before her again. Caspian's expression softened in a way I had never seen before. Not commanding, but vulnerable, deeply vulnerable. Then Seren's voice broke the silence. She looked back and forth between them, confusion painting her features. Her pulse quickened. Caspian took a slow step toward her, not imposing, not forceful, but cautious, like a man approaching something precious. Elora, he whispered, she deserves the truth. Elora nodded faintly, tears gathering at the edges of her lashes. A truth buried too long. Elora turned to her daughter fully now, her voice trembling. Mom, what are you saying? Elora swallowed hard. Caspian and I, we knew each other before you were born. Seren's eyes widened. You knew each other? How? Why didn't you ever? He was the man I loved. Seren took a step back, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. You loved him? Yes, Elora whispered, very deeply. Caspian's voice joined hers, low and filled with unspoken years. And I loved her, he said. I never stopped. Seren stared at him now, searching his face for answers she didn't even know she needed. Then why did you disappear? She asked, voice shaking. Caspian's chest tightened. I didn't disappear, he said gently. I didn't even know you were born the lost message. Elora lowered her gaze, guilt weighing her shoulders. I tried to contact him once, she said quietly, when I needed him the most, when I thought something might be wrong with the pregnancy. I reached out, but he never came. Caspian's eyes widened. Elora, I never got that message. She looked up at him quickly, surprised by the pain in his voice. I waited, he said. I checked every day. When I came back to the apartment, everything was gone. You were gone. Her lips parted, as if she were realizing something she had never allowed herself to consider. I thought you chose not to come back, she whispered. I thought you chose to leave, he replied. Both of them sank into a silence that spoke louder than anger. A misunderstanding, one moment of broken communication, had redirected all three of their lives. Seren watched them, her mind spinning, her throat tight. So, neither of you abandoned the other. Caspian shook his head firmly. I wanted a future with you both, he said. I still do. Elora's voice cracked. I was scared. I was alone. I thought I had no choice. And I lived with regret every single day, Caspian said softly. Seren's breaking point. Seren lifted a trembling hand to her mouth. So my father didn't leave me? Her voice was small, a whisper wrapped in years of self-questioning. No, he said, his voice trembling. If I had known, I would have run through every obstacle between us. Nothing would have kept me from you. A single tear fell down Seren's cheek. All her life, she had lived with a silent ache, a blank space where a father's presence should have been. She had tried to fill it with ambition, kindness, effort, anything she could create with her own hands. But nothing ever fully quieted that longing. And now, suddenly, the man whose absence shaped her was standing right in front of her, whole, heartbroken, and pleading for a chance she never imagined he wanted. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Caspian's voice softened further. You don't have to say anything yet. Just let me tell you this. Not as a CEO, not as a stranger across the table, but as the man who has prayed for you every single year without knowing where you were. He paused as emotion tightened his throat. The words hung in the air, heavy but tender. Seren closed her eyes. When she finally opened her eyes, tears streamed freely down her face. Not from anger, not from joy, but from the overwhelming collision of everything she had ever wondered. The first step forward. Elora stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's back. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have told you sooner. I thought I was protecting you. I see now that I was only protecting the part of me that still hurt. Caspian spoke softly, his voice barely above breath. Seren looked at both of them, her mother trembling beside her, her father standing before her with eyes full of hope and sorrow. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. I don't know what this means yet, she said honestly. Caspian nodded slowly, relief washing through him. All three of them stood together, not whole yet, but no longer separated by silence. Sometimes truth doesn't fix everything in a single moment. Sometimes truth simply opens the door, and that day, the door finally opened. The moments after the truth came out felt quiet, almost fragile. Not fragile like something that would crack. Fragile like something newly born, something that needed gentle hands and patient hearts. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. Nobody pretended to have all the answers. Seren wiped her cheeks. Elora steadied her breathing. Caspian stood still, afraid even one wrong word might shatter the delicate peace forming in the room. It wasn't anger that hung in the air. It wasn't blame. It was the weight of a story finally spoken after years of being locked away. And now, it was time to rebuild. But rebuilding doesn't happen with fireworks. It doesn't happen with grand declarations. It happens through small steps, honest conversations, and a willingness to walk forward even when the past presses heavily behind you. Caspian offered to walk them to the lobby. It wasn't necessary, but the gesture felt like an unspoken question. Can I stay close, even for a moment? As they walked, Seren kept her gaze lowered, trying to process the flood of emotions rushing through her. Elora walked on her other side, torn between pride for her daughter's courage and fear of the unknown that lay ahead. When they reached the lobby doors, Seren turned to him. Her voice was soft, unsure but sincere. I think we need time. All of us. Caspian nodded immediately. I understand, and I'll give you as much time as you need. He hesitated, then added, but if you're willing, I'd like to take you both to lunch sometime. Not to talk about the past. Just to begin. Something. Seren exchanged a glance with her mother. Elora nodded gently. Seren swallowed. Then she nodded too. Okay, she said, we can try. Caspian exhaled slowly, relief washing through him like a quiet sunrise. A first step toward healing. Over the next few days, everything felt different. Seren moved through the house quietly, thoughtful, introspective, trying to make sense of the truth that changed the shape of her story. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she smiled unexpectedly. Sometimes she sat with her mother in silence, both unsure how to ask the questions in their hearts. Elora, meanwhile, wrestled with her own guilt. Not because she wanted to hurt her daughter, but because she had tried so hard to protect her that she didn't realize she'd created a wound of her own. One evening, Seren found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea she hadn't touched. You okay? Seren asked softly. Elora looked up with tired eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Seren sat across from her. For what? For letting my fear decide your story. For not giving you the chance to know him. For assuming the worst. For everything. Seren reached for her mother's hand. You were doing the best you could with what you had, she said. I'm not angry. I just need time to understand all of it. Elora nodded, tears forming. I'm grateful you're giving this a chance. So am I, Seren replied. And she meant it. Sometimes rebuilding starts with a simple truth spoken honestly between two hearts. The lunch that started it all. A few days later, Caspian invited them to a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. Not flashy, not crowded, just peaceful. Seren arrived with nerves fluttering in her stomach. Elora arrived with steady resolve mixed with cautious hope. And Caspian, he arrived early, sitting outside on the patio, staring at the water as though gathering strength from its calm flow. When they approached, he stood up quickly, unsure whether to hug them, shake their hands, or simply greet them. He settled for a warm smile. Thank you for coming, he said. They sat down, and for a moment nobody knew where to begin. So they started with simple things, the weather, stories about Seren's school and volunteer projects. And little by little, something softened. Caspian laughed, gently, not loudly, and the sound surprised even him. Elora smiled, tentative at first, then naturally. Seren asked questions, quiet ones, curious ones, and Caspian answered every one with care. Just 3 people beginning again. A new chapter written not with regrets, a developing connection. Over the next few weeks, Caspian took time off from his overwhelming schedule. A rare move for a man in his position, just to be present. He didn't overwhelm Serin with attention. He didn't rush her. He simply made himself available. If she wanted to talk, he listened. If she asked questions, he answered gently. If she needed space, he stepped back. He attended one of her volunteer events quietly, standing in the back, watching her interact with children and families. He saw her heart, her compassion, her strength, and every moment affirmed what he already felt. One afternoon, after watching her sort donated books at the community center, he finally said, "You remind me so much of your mother." Her cheeks warmed. "Everyone says I look like her." "You do," he replied. "But your determination, that came from both of us." She didn't say anything at first, but she didn't look away either. That was the first moment she truly allowed herself to feel connected to him, a quiet love rekindling. As Caspian and Serin built something new, something gentle was also happening between Caspian and Elora. Not a rushing back into old love, not a desperate attempt to reclaim what once was. They talked more, shared small memories, apologized without needing to be asked, and slowly allowed space for warmth to return. One evening after dropping Serin off at a study group, Caspian walked Elora to her car. "You've done an incredible job raising her," he said. Elora's voice softened. "I did the best I could. But I wish I had handled everything differently." Caspian shook his head gently. "Life doesn't always give us the perfect path, but it's giving us a chance now." Elora looked up at him. There was no anger left in her eyes, just reflection, and something tender blooming quietly beneath it. A step closer, not a leap, just a step. And sometimes a single step is the beginning of a long-awaited journey. Weeks passed, each one unfolding with new conversations, new realizations, and new bridges quietly forming between past and present. During that time, Serin continued her scholarship process without any special treatment, without any promises, and without any guarantee of what the outcome would be. Caspian made sure of that. Despite everything happening between them, he insisted that her application be reviewed the same way every other finalist's was, and Serin respected him for that. Still, she couldn't pretend her heart wasn't stirring with anticipation and fear. She wanted the scholarship not because of who he was, but because of who she hoped to become. But she also wanted something else, a connection, a chance to rewrite her story, her place in her father's life, not as a recipient of his success, but as a daughter learning who he truly was. Elora watched from the background, supporting her daughter quietly, offering strength when Serin's nerves grew too heavy, and listening patiently whenever she needed to talk through her doubts. Caspian kept his distance during the review process, giving Serin space to breathe. He didn't want her to feel indebted or influenced. He wanted fairness, wanted his daughter to succeed on her own merit. But every time he saw her, every time he heard her voice, he felt something inside him healing in ways he never expected. The day of the announcement. On the morning of the final scholarship ceremony, the Wardstone Auditorium was filled with finalists, their families, board members, and staff. The energy in the room held a mix of hope and tension, the kind that gathers before life-changing news. Serin sat in the third row, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her heart thudded with every passing moment. Elora sat beside her, calm on the outside but carrying a full storm of emotion inside. She kept glancing at her daughter, whispering reassurance whenever Seren's breath trembled. Caspian stood backstage, reviewing his speech. He had delivered dozens of addresses in his life, to investors, employees, politicians, and world leaders. But this one made his palms warm, not because of the crowd, but because of the young woman sitting quietly in the audience, unaware of the decision already made, unaware of what her future now held. When the lights dimmed and the announcer called his name, Caspian stepped onto the stage with a composed posture, but a heartbeat that echoed loudly in his chest. The crowd applauded. He nodded slightly, then approached the podium. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady yet warm. "Every one of you represents dedication, resilience, and the power of perseverance." He spoke about opportunity, about commitment, about young people with the ability to change the world. Yet as he spoke, his eyes kept drifting toward one place. The third row. A young woman with hope and uncertainty in equal measure. When the time came to announce the winner, he paused. Let the room breathe. Then he said, "This year's Wardstone Scholar is..." Seren Wynne gasps. Applause. A burst of emotion swept the room. Elora covered her mouth, tears gathering instantly. Seren froze. She blinked once, twice. Then her eyes filled with disbelief, followed by overflowing joy. Her name, her story, her effort, her dreams. It was all happening. She stood slowly, trembling, overwhelmed, clutching the edge of her seat before walking toward the stage. Caspian watched her the entire time, his heart full in a way he hadn't felt in years. When she reached him, he smiled, not the polished CEO smile the world knew, but a genuine, heartfelt one. He handed her the certificate, then leaned forward slightly and whispered. Seren looked up at him, emotion shimmering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "but for being honest, for showing up." It wasn't pride in her academic achievement, the private conversation afterward. After the ceremony, the crowd gathered around to congratulate the finalists. Seren was surrounded by other students, board members, and staff, all offering kind words. But she kept glancing toward the corner of the room where Caspian stood speaking with a few colleagues. When the room finally thinned out, Caspian approached her. "You really did this," he said softly. "Not because of me, but because of who you are." Seren nodded, still emotional. "I didn't know what to expect today," she said, her voice gentle. Caspian took a slow breath. He wanted to say so much. Wanted to tell her he was proud. Wanted to tell her how long he had prayed for a moment like this. Wanted to tell her he wasn't going anywhere. But instead, he chose words that came from a place deeper than any speech. "If you'll allow it," he said quietly, "I'd like to be part of your life, not just during this scholarship, but in whatever ways you feel comfortable." Seren looked up at him, her expression softening. I want that too." Nothing needed to be defined. All that mattered was the next step, the beginning of a relationship formed not by the years they lost, but by the willingness to build what they could now. Elora's quiet realization. As she watched them talk, Elora felt her heart tighten, not with fear, but with humility. For the first time in a long time, she saw something she hadn't expected to see again. Not the ambitious dreamer who disappeared from her life, but the man with gentleness in his eyes and sincerity in his voice. A man who had changed, a man who was trying. And she knew, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to face it. The months that followed the scholarship announcement held a quiet kind of transformation. Not the dramatic kind that shouts for attention, but the gentle kind that grows slowly, day by day, moment by moment. Like sunlight coming through the blinds in the early morning. Seren stepped into her new academic life with determination and purpose, but this time, she didn't step into it alone. She had her mother, the constant anchor she could always count on. And now, she also had her father, learning how to stand in a place he longed to fill for 17 years. Nothing about their journey was rushed. Nothing was forced. They simply allowed themselves to grow into the new shape of their relationship. A new rhythm between father and daughter they began with simple gestures. Caspian helped her move into her campus housing, carrying boxes with a care that made her smile. He asked where her desk should go, where she wanted her bookshelf, whether she needed an extra lamp for studying, not because he thought she couldn't do it, but because he wanted to be present for the kind of moments he'd missed all her life. When she had her first difficult exam, he sent her a message reminding her how capable she was. Not pushing, not pressuring, just supporting. Some evenings they met for dinner near campus. Other times he would visit her volunteer events, standing quietly in the back and watching her lead with compassion. He knew she inherited not just from her mother, but from him too. One afternoon, after a long study session, they sat by the campus fountain. Students passed by laughing and chatting, but their little corner was peaceful. "I used to imagine what you might be like," Caspian said softly. Seren turned to him, curious. "Some nights I couldn't sleep. I'd wonder, did you have your mother's gentleness? Did you like books? Did you laugh easily? Did you look my way at all, even without knowing why?" Seren looked down, a shy smile forming. "I wondered too," she admitted, "but I thought you didn't want to find me." He exhaled slowly, pain flickering in his eyes. "I searched," he said, "but searching for someone who doesn't want to be found is almost impossible. I didn't know your name, your location, your school. Nothing. All I had was the regret that I failed you." Gently she placed her hand on top of his. "I think," she said softly, "we both grew through what we didn't have. And maybe that's why we appreciate this now." He nodded, eyes glistening. "That's exactly why." And in that moment, something settled between them. Not a complete healing, but the beginning of one. Elora's quiet evolution. Meanwhile, Elora found herself navigating a new season too. For years she had lived with the weight of a single choice. The choice to walk away from the man she loved because she believed she had been abandoned. The choice to raise her daughter alone. The choice to protect her heart from reopening old wounds. But now, each time she saw Caspian making an effort, it touched something deep in her that she thought had closed forever. One evening, Seren invited both of them to a small event she was speaking at for a youth leadership group. They ended up arriving early, sitting beside each other in the front row. The room was quiet, filled with chairs still being arranged, and for a moment they were simply two people with a shared past, sitting close for the first time in 17 years. Caspian glanced at her. "You've stayed strong all these years," he said softly. Elora sighed, brushing a loose strand of hair away from her face. "I did what I had to do," she replied, "but that doesn't mean it wasn't lonely at times." He looked down, guilt tightening his expression. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "More than you know." She didn't rush to absolve him. She didn't rush to blame him. She simply looked at him, really looked at him, made him wiser. "We can't rewrite the past," she said quietly, "but we can decide how we move forward. One step at a time." Caspian nodded. "That's all I'm asking for. One step, and the chance to earn the right to take the next." Something gentle passed between them. The tender, growing connection. Over the next weeks, Elora and Caspian began sharing small pockets of time together. Not big declarations, just moments. A warm conversation after dropping Serin off. A quiet walk to the parking lot after an event. A shared cup of coffee at a small cafe. A soft smile exchanged when they thought the other wasn't looking. One evening, after talking for nearly an hour outside a bookstore, Caspian noticed a chill in the air and gently placed his jacket around her shoulders. Just thoughtful. Elora's breath caught for a moment. She looked at him with a softness she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," she whispered. A family beginning to form. Serin watched their quiet connection with a mixture of hope and hesitation. She didn't push them together. She didn't ask for anything more than what they were ready to give. "You know," she said gently, "you look different when you talk to him." Elora raised a brow. "Different how?" Elora smiled softly, glancing out the window. "I suppose I'm remembering who he was." "And learning who he is." Serin nodded. "That sounds fair." And that's how they grew. Not as a family defined by the years they missed, but as one discovering who they could become now. Through conversation, through forgiveness, through patience, through choosing hope over hurt. What once felt shattered now felt possible. What once felt lost now felt reachable. What once felt broken now had room to mend. As their story continued to unfold, something deeper began forming in the quiet moments, something beyond reconciliation, beyond romance, beyond lost years being rediscovered. It was wisdom, hard-earned wisdom, the kind that only grows after you've walked through storms that should have broken you, the kind that settles into your spirit when you've lived long enough to understand that life isn't always fair, but it is always instructive. This chapter of their lives wasn't about scholarship forms or difficult conversations. It was about what they learned through it all. Lessons that shaped them, lessons that humbled them, lessons that helped them grow, and if you look closely enough, you'll see that these lessons speak to anyone who has ever loved, lost, or longed for something deeper. Elora and Caspian realized they didn't lose their relationship because they stopped loving each other. They lost it because they stopped communicating. A single message that never arrived. A single moment where one needed support and the other was unaware. A single misunderstanding that grew into years of distance. Silence has a way of convincing people of the worst. It tells the mind stories the heart never meant to write. Lesson 2. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It doesn't mean pretending hurt didn't shape us. It doesn't mean the wound didn't leave a scar. It means choosing not to let that scar define how we walk forward. Elora had to forgive herself for the choices she made in fear. Caspian had to forgive himself for the time he lost. Serin had to forgive the silence she grew up with. Not because forgiveness was easy, but because forgiveness was necessary. Holding on to bitterness would have kept them trapped in a chapter that was already over. Letting go gave them room to write a new one. Lesson 3. love can return in a new form, a form that grows at a steady pace. Their love didn't come back to rewrite the past. Sometimes the breakthrough we need comes through a door we never noticed, or through a meeting we didn't anticipate, or through a truth we didn't think we were ready for. New beginnings rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary days. Before we move into the next chapter of this story, I want to invite you to respond from the heart. If this message touched you, if these lessons spoke to something in your spirit, take a moment to support this space. Tap the like button, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next part, and share in the comments what lesson from this story spoke to you the most. Your thoughts make this community stronger. Your engagement helps these stories reach those who need them most. There's something powerful about reaching the end of a story like this. Not because everything is perfect, not because every wound has vanished, but because growth has taken root where pain once lived. As I look back on the journey of Elora, Caspian, and Serin, one truth stands out. They didn't reach this point because life was gentle with them. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes it arrives after life has weathered us in unexpected ways. Protecting someone doesn't always mean shielding them from truth. Her strength wasn't in running alone. Her strength was in finding the courage to open the door she had closed for far too long. She learned how to stand tall without a father beside her. She allowed love to enter a space she once believed would always remain empty. And in doing so, she found not just success, but belonging. The final message, if there's anything this story teaches, it's this. No matter what you've lost, no matter who walked away, no matter how many years have passed, love can still rise. Trust can still be rebuilt. Hope can still take root where disappointment once stood. Life doesn't always return what was taken, but sometimes, in its own timing, it brings back what was meant for you all along. Renewed, restored, and ready to grow, and all it takes is the courage to open your heart again. If this story touched your spirit, if it made you reflect, or if it helped you see love and forgiveness from a new angle, I invite you to stay connected. Tap the like button if you haven't already. Hit subscribe to join this growing community. And in the comments, share your thoughts. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Your voice is welcome here. Your reflection matters here. And together we'll keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and uplift. This has been Love Tales with Mr. Bennett. Until the next story, take care of your heart.